Thanks for joining us, everyone. We're here today to discuss a story of conscious self-disruption, which is the story of Unloan. To help us with that story, I'm joined by Dan, who's the Chief Executive of Unloan, Supun, who's the Chief Product Officer of X15 Ventures, and Tess, who is the Head of Banking Services for the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. For the next 25 minutes, we're not just going to talk about the journey undertaken by Unloan, CBA and X15, but we're going to talk about the tech integration and strategic buy-in required to be able to build a disruptive home loan business inside the largest bank in Australia. And we might have some time for questions at the end, but we're trying to sub it down. Oop. Closer, sorry, there we go. So to kick things off, we're going to do a quick introduction. So Dan.
G'day, Justin. Daniel Etley. I'm the CEO of Unloan. Previously spent a decade in PropTech with realestate.com.au and as CEO of HomePass. But now the proud leader of Unloan.
Supun.
Hey everyone, so my name's Supun King Jawadana. I've been at X15 for 3 years since we launched and the Chief Product Officer there. And we try to connect people like Dan and the Unloan business with Tess and CBA more broadly. I've been in and around this space for the last 8 years talking about corporate and startup innovation in our old innovation labs that CommBank set up. So I know some of the things that we have to get right, some of the challenges X15 is staring into.
Tess.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Tess Sutherland. I'm the Head of Banking Services at CBA, and I lead the teams who activate banking services for ventures such as Unloan.
Great. So I think to kick things off, Dan, can you tell us a little bit about Unloan?
That would be a pleasure. So essentially Unloan's our reimagining of what we think home loans should look like in a digital generation. It's not rocket science. We think things should be a lot easier when you make things digital. So we've focused on 3 dimensions of easy. One is we wanted to make the product home loans easier to understand. And we did that by just focusing on one simple low rate for everyone, getting rid of all the complexity of multiple rate variations and conditions. The second part is that we wanted to make it easier to live with once you had the loan. And the way we brought that to life is by adding a discount that gets better and better and better every year you're with us. And the third way we thought that it would be nice to make it easier for our customers is to make it easier to get. Home loans should not be a difficult process. We think they have been traditionally much harder to get than they ought to be. So with Unloan, the online application process can be completed in as little as 10 minutes.
And how did Unloan come about?
So I've been floating around PropTech for the last decade, as I mentioned previously, and it's hard to be in PropTech without also bumping heads along the way with the financial journey of customers. So I've been sort of long eyeing the space around home loans as I've helped people in their home loan search journey through realestate.com.au and other ventures focused on the PropTech space. When I sold my previous venture to an ASX-listed company, I started looking for ways to bring that to life.
And did you ever think about doing it? I know I'm asking you all the questions. I will get to you guys. But did you ever think about going in alone?
Of course. I mean, you've got great agencies as an entrepreneur, especially if you're venture-backed as well, and the pace at which you can do things. But when you think a little bit more deeply about FinTech, it's hard to escape the primacy of brand and balance sheet. Lending operates on relatively small margins and needs a lot of scale to get to a viable business. So, it was clear to me, sort of after a little bit more thinking, that it would require, to make Unloan happen, it would require the backing of a bank. So I started having a look around the market. Of course, the downside of working with a bank traditionally is it's very hard to work with a very large regulated entity. Luckily for us, at the same time as I was looking for the perfect bank partner, X15 was born, which helps and is designed to help ventures more easily access Commonwealth Bank services. So after sort of a little bit of a honeymoon period and making sure that our values aligned and the mission was mutually exciting, we very quickly decided to build Unloan as part of CommBank in partnership with X15.
And so you talk about quickly. How long did it actually take?
Yeah, quickly is always relative in finance, isn't it? There's probably two processes. One was obviously pitching the idea and building that sort of shared conviction in Unloan as a good opportunity for CommBank to back. That was actually surprisingly quick. X15 at the time was just set up and was ready to hear and quickly assess venture opportunities. That was one of the promises, that we would, X15 understood the space, so could get to a decision relatively quickly. It was ultimately approved by the CBA board soon thereafter. Post that approval, it took us about 2 years of building in collaboration with several CBA teams to get Unloan to market, and that we launched in May of this year.
So Sapun, what about X15 Ventures? So can you talk a little bit more about your involvement and how X15 Ventures helps ventures like Unloan?
Yeah, sure. So Dan was talking about the journey that he's been on and Unloan over the last 2.5 years. We've actually been on quite a similar parallel journey for just as long. So if I take you, to answer your question, if I go all the way back to when we set up X15 and the problem we're trying to solve, hopefully this resonates with a lot of people in this room. The problem is, on one hand, we know if you're doing experimental businesses like Unloan was back then, within the context of a large organisation like CBA, where it's designed for very mature features that serve millions of Australians, that's really hard. But on the other hand, if you're genuinely standalone and you're a good team in a co-working space, to get access to scale assets, to actually grow your business and integrate into large organizations, it's really hard, right? And so how do you get the best of both worlds? Reality is, hopefully you all kind of have appreciated this over the last 10 years, I certainly have, there's a lot of cynicism in this space around the conversation of how do you get that handshake, right, between corporate and startup. And so when we set up X15, we said, well, the only way we can actually deal with that cynicism is two things. Be really authentic around the fact that this is hard. It's a really hard problem. And we have to set up X15 in the right way. So that means a different tech environment to the group, a different way that we look at risk and control processes, a different setup in terms of our operating model so we can support Dan and entrepreneurs like himself. And then secondly, instead of sitting here in a panel talking about the hope of doing it, let's wait till we actually have some real proof points. So, 2 years later, really excited that we actually have a real amazing proof point, because the Unloan business is a fantastic example of how you can get that connection right between startup and some of the really powerful assets that CommBank can bring. So, I'll let Tess talk a little bit about that.
And I think that's a good segue across to Tess. So, Tess, from a technology perspective, why was CBA interested in even going down this path? I think being the #1 home lender in Australia, why partner up with someone like Unloan?
Yeah, I think driving digital innovation is core to CBA's technology strategy. So, the partnership with Unloan was really timely as a way of us thinking differently about how we, continue to evolve our systems, continue to, resolve for resiliency and risk issues, but also, unlock speed for innovation in our own digital channels. So, it was a really good time, and working with Daniel and the Unloan team were a great sort of slightly demanding sort of first customer, and we were able to use that to start to shift the mindset within the bank and start to think about, okay, how do we create capabilities that, and expose the capabilities we have, I suppose, by creating access points for ventures such as Dan, and also sort of new internal innovations as well.
And so how do you guys all fit together? I think that's probably the next bit of conversation. We've got Unloan on its own, we've got X15, the glue, we've got CommBank that has all the services. What role did each of you play? Maybe Dan, you could kick us off.
Yeah, sure. The demanding venture. I think so. Firstly, we're set up as a division within Commonwealth Bank, but very independently operated. So we've got obviously its own CEO, which is myself, and I'm supported by the full suite that you'd typically expect of any venture. So product, marketing, design, operations, risk. Who else have I missed? But typically full-fledged operating capability within the team, and we're also then plugged into CBA probably in two major ways. One is that we use CBA's banking and payments services, and that's made available to us via a newly developed set of APIs, which I'm sure Tess will want to speak a little bit more about. And the other one is the access to specialists. And obviously you have legal, HR, which are valuable, but probably the most indispensable one is the line 2 risk function, which helps us make sure that we remain safe and obviously compliant with our responsible lending obligations.
Do you want to jump in, Tess?
Yeah, sure. So Dan touched there on the banking APIs. One of the challenges we had when we embarked on this partnership was, how do we let Unloan operate as a venture, and the speed and the pace and the agility that they had as a venture, but as CBA still sort of, balance the risk and the complexity that comes with a legacy and very large and complex banking tech stack. So to do that, we implemented or built, as Dan said, a number of banking APIs and exposed those securely and externally for Unloan to call. Those APIs allow Unloan to create accounts and customers and link the two within CBA, allow Unloan to access our payments capability, disperse loans, execute payments between transactions. We take all of that data and we flow that into the existing capabilities within CBA so that we can use regulatory reporting, comprehensive credit reporting, capital, treasury, etc. So leverage that data and those all of those functions that we have within the bank.
And Sapun, how do you glue it together?
Yeah, well, we're the glue, as you said, Justin. So echoing what Tess and Dan said, we essentially think of ourselves as a platform, right? And I think the X15 model, it's complex. It's complex to explain, but we think there's a lot of magic in it if we get it right. And so our platform, if you think about it, we essentially have a set of services and we say, hey, Dan, we want you to do what you know best. And some of the entrepreneurs in this room would hopefully resonate with this, which is be an entrepreneur, right? Pivot your business, focus and obsess on your customers, make a delightful product. But at the same time, we have services to people like Tess that say, do you know what? Dan looks trustworthy, but you don't have to trust him. We know you can't trust him, right? So we will stand behind Dan. We will provide that assurance to not just Unloan, but the other ventures that we also provide support for. And so to break that down a bit, we think of the platform in 3 words. So we think of it as pace, we think of it as scale, and we think of it as safety in the middle. And so I touch a bit more on that. So on pace, we want Dan to operate with the pace of a startup. To get that, to really affect that, we provide tech services. We enable Unloan to use modern and emerging SaaS tools. We have an operating model where we actually are venture-focused rather than corporate-focused. And we have a community of ventures. And so hopefully, from learning from the Unloan experience, the next time we do an Unloan or we invest in an Unloan, well, actually, it might be that much faster. Now, for startups in this room, that's not that sexy, I get it. Like startup pace, we're already operating there. But for us, it's really important to get that right. And then on the scale side, Tess has already touched on this in terms of some of the integrations that we enable Unloan to access. But if you think about some other assets, the yellow diamond, I think everyone in this room knows the yellow diamond, but everyone in Australia knows the yellow diamond. That's really powerful as an asset, right, that Commonwealth Bank has. And then when it comes to distribution, we have a venture to kind of really bring this to life. We have a venture that does conveyancing, and they've built this conveyancing platform. But the really exciting thing for us is we turned on distribution on the CommBank app, working with people like Tess. And basically now, if you have pre-approval across CBA pre-approval for a mortgage in Australia, you get a notification that says, why don't you check out this conveyancing venture? And the moment we turned that on, we saw a 10 times growth in that venture, right? That's the power of distribution. And so if you are in the market, by the way, for buying a home and you want conveyancing, it's called Home In. Check it out. It's an awesome venture. But as an example, going back to the point around, we don't want to just talk about this. We actually want to demonstrate it. That's a really great example of scale. And then if you get to the point of, well, how do you marry these 2 worlds? Well, how do we provide the right level of safety? That's critical. And for us, and Dan's touched upon this, we're going to set and create a team of people that come from cybersecurity, procurement, legal, risk, etc., but dedicated to venturing. Very different. Not raise a ticket and talk to someone in the group, but actually understanding venture context, but also come from a corporate. And because we're new, what's really exciting for us is we have an opportunity, we have a greenfields opportunity to say, actually, while you're focusing on your business, Dan, why don't we think about embedding in some of these controls and practices from day one? And so Unloan is not enterprise ready in 3 years. It's enterprise ready now. It's built to be enterprise ready. And so when these ventures scale through some of these assets, we don't need to then say, hang on a second, now you need to re-architect, now you need to change. So that's the model. It's the pace, the scale, and the safety. It's the interplay of those 3 words. I can talk about this like it's really easy. It's not. It's really hard. We sometimes get it right, we sometimes get it wrong, but we actually have made a lot of progress, right, in terms of actually trying to get that balance right, and we fully believe there's magic in that.
And so if we shift the conversation a little bit to almost like the elephant in the room around the sensitivities of that conscious disruption within a business or the bank, what was it like launching what many would perceive from the outside as a competitive product to yourself? Commonwealth Bank and Unloan. Dan, do you want to go off?
It was the magic, as Soup says. No, it was, it's really interesting. So the first, I think, response would be, isn't Unloan competitive with CommBank? It's obviously in the home loans game, as you said, and it's a lower price for a home loan. It's actually incredibly complementary to the Commonwealth Bank's primary business. So if just in terms of Commonwealth Bank's current servicing pool, it's Australia's leading bank, servicing 1 in 4 all home loan mortgages today, so incredibly large footprint, and with that large footprint, obviously a lot of variation in the products to serve such a broad audience. But there was one very small but growing segment of customers who were perhaps underserved by that broad offering, and that is those customers who are prepared to deal directly online, happy to forego some of the frills and fees and sort of nuanced product features, but in return for a slightly sharper price. So that's Unloan's distinct offering for that distinct customer segment. It's probably single digits in terms of the percent of the overall market of home loan offers, but like I said, it is growing. The other sort of important part that comes with offering a simple no frills product at a slightly better price point is that you need also a lower cost operating model to justify that and make that viable. So Unloan's also built with the premise that we're stripping out not just the complexity for customers, but also the cost profile associated with bringing that offering to market. So incredibly digital DNA in how we run, very efficient in its operations, very, very high ratios of loan applications to lending specialists to assess, and of course rapidly evolving and continuing to get better and better in terms of the technology automation we apply behind each and every process within the Unloan business.
And in the last couple of minutes that we've got left, one question, and I'll do the same for all of you. If you could give any advice to anyone in the room around key learnings, takeaways for teaming up with someone the size of CBA using X15 Ventures or launching a conscious disruptive business, what advice would you give the room? Tess, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So from a corporate perspective, there was a couple of things. So one was, we used this to shift that mindset, to start thinking about not just building an outcome, not just sort of building an API that Dan could call, but actually creating something that had value beyond Unloan. And the way that we built these services for Unloan makes them reusable, and we're accessing them for other capabilities, both within the bank and for other ventures. And I think the second thing was this was a totally novel way of delivering within the bank, and so we really had to redefine roles and responsibilities. Who's doing what? How do we partner across the three? And the three of us obviously work very, very closely together and have done for some time. And how do we create that effective working relationship and set that up?
Dan?
So it's always a conscious trade-off. I think for most ventures, you're trying to bring your belief of the best possible product to the widest audience as quickly as possible. And for us, going back to my thoughts about banking, is that the primacy of the brand and strength of balance sheet are really important for this sector in particular, home lending. So for us, it was a straightforward decision. It was well worth the additional investment we'd have to make to work effectively with a much larger organisation. Similarly, I think it's wonderful that Commonwealth Bank has chosen to also provide vehicles like X15 that make it easier to work with the power that CommBank can provide in a way that lowers the effort to outcome ratio for the venture, and that's getting better and better all the time as well. So I think, again, conscious trade-off. For us, the benefits have been well worth it. Certainly, the yellow diamond that Soup's referred to, that puts us in the consideration phase that we wouldn't have had if we weren't partnered with CommBank for many customers, that, you know, this is an offering that I should consider because it's built by CommBank. It's helped us also achieve, you know, it's 3 months on since launch, and we're probably the fastest growing venture in our space right now, and we absolutely couldn't have done that without having made those trade-off decisions.
Supun, do you want to finish this off?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. Echoing a little bit on what both Tess and Dan said, I think the main insight for me in the last couple of years is it's a really difficult model to get right, but there's a lot of value in it. And so, you know, I wouldn't be here 2 years ago talking about it because we didn't know what we were doing, quite frankly. We are a venture supporting other ventures, but at the same time, through real use cases, and we always say, Dan, thanks for being a guinea pig, because we almost built Unloan and X15 together. It makes it easier, right, for the next ventures and you know, people in this room. So if you're sitting here thinking, well, how do I get involved? We've also evolved our model in terms of which ventures we work with. And so whether it be you're an entrepreneur like Dan and you want to build a business within or supported by X15 from scratch, that's possible. Whether it be we've actually acquired a venture, and Justin, you would know this better than most people, but you know, acquiring Doshi, bring that into the X15 portfolio, but then enabling it to access CBA to let it grow rather than stifle it through corporate impost. That's been really valuable for us to learn how to do that. And then we've also started taking minority investments in existing startups, existing ventures, right? And for us, that's very selective, but at the same time, we can do it because we know now that we can distribute through CommBank's assets. And so you might have heard of Different. It's a venture that's also in the home buying space, looking at property management. Their biggest customer segments they're targeting are real estate agents and people who have investment properties. And actually, CBA has a lot of those people that are customers already of the bank. And we've managed to actually now distribute Different as well through the CommBank app. So plenty of ways to get involved. If you're broadly in the space of disrupting financial services, or you're closely aligned to financial services, whether it be conveyancing, shopping, you know, hospitality is like Doshi is in, get in touch. We'd love to talk to you and talk about our model a bit more.
So I've just been told we do have a couple of minutes for questions if anyone has any. I think a microphone's coming down the front, down here. It's running.
Yeah, no, I didn't put my trainers on. Hi there. I'm really interested just that challenge of like how much of a platform you build out from an X15 to enable like an initial venture like Unloan, and the alignment with like CBA. And so that what can often be a bit of a chasm of like there are a very broad set of capabilities that CBA have established to support a mass market versus Unloan as a new proposition that's coming to market. Like how did you navigate like how much of that extensive like capability set that you needed to be able to like set up? And you talked a little bit about it being enterprise ready from day one. That's often a bit of a challenge I see, is like, well, do we need to build this because it's a new proposition versus, oh, actually we need to, as we partner with a large enterprise, it needs to be enterprise ready. So I'm interested just a little bit of commentary on like how did you balance those two sort of polar opposites?
Yeah, great question. I could spend hours talking about it. I'll give you the high level. A couple of observations. Firstly, not all ventures are like Unloan. And so we're not here to say Unloan has certain risk and compliance requirements that a lot of other ventures don't have within our portfolio and people in this room. So it's not a one size fits all. Having said that, the way that X15 is set up is to say there are some common things. There are common requirements that we would expect, you know, anyone from the bank, from the regulators to just say, show us how you do testing around your code environment, for example. How do we actually have some common standards and patterns that are still flexible for venturing, right? Because even Unloan is not as big as the large mortgage book that CBA has. But how do we do it in a way where actually Dan and his product team and his tech team and his design team can operate with as much agency as we can provide? Now, it's hard, right? But there are certain things that we have started designing and developing, reusable components that they can use, processes that are adjusted for venturing, so we're not necessarily going to ask them for a whole range of different documentation. We're actually going to be smarter about how we can observe that and stay in the background and let Unloan carry on running its business and pushing code into production. That's the way we think about it. if there was an easy answer, I'd say it's complex. The other thing I'd say as well is we set ourselves a goal of learning this with real use cases, because the reality is we can sit about and talk about it in a vacuum and say, we can get this handshake right, but it's only through Unloan and or the 8 other ventures we've looked at. They're like, oh, that's interesting. That's not quite working. We need a solution there that is more venture-like rather than corporate-like. If you want to add anything.
Any other questions? Got one here on the left.
Hi, my name is Jacqueline. My question is for Dan, really. I wanted to ask if you could share a little bit more about the biggest trade-off that you had to make to go into this model, and what were some of the decision parameters that helped you to get to your final decision, and any regrets or any reflection post? Thanks.
No regrets on the decision. Obviously, there's always things you want to do over again, right? And think, oh, if I'd known that, I would have pushed on a different door, because it would have been faster or easier to get there. So a lot of learnings, of course, as you would imagine, when you do anything large and substantial. For me, probably one of the biggest decisions was probably on the CBA side, about whether to expose its banking and payments platform to Unloan via a set of APIs which weren't available at the time. So that, as you can imagine, as Tess said, working with legacy systems, it's not as easy as it is with a greenfield startup to suddenly put a sort of zero trust API layer and make those services available outside of the bank firewalls, which is essentially what needed to happen. And if it was just for Unloan, it probably wouldn't have made financial sense for CBA to make that sort of investment. So it was obviously a very forward-moving strategy that serving Unloan in this way would not only allow Unloan to come to market, but will also build new capabilities for CBA to deliver services in a more reusable and componentised fashion to serve other areas of its business as well, whether it be ventures or even independent business, or even other business units within the bank. So that was probably the biggest decision for CBA to make, whether to expose its banking and payment services to a venture outside the bank.
Time for one more. Anyone? Right in the middle. Oh, we've got two. We'll do short answers.
Okay, cool. I guess I'll keep this one nice and short. Hello, Tess. And I guess I'll ask, with all the infrastructure that you've set up with Unloan, if you do have to create another Unloan, what's the percentage split now? Right? As in, is it 80% you've done the work, and there's 20% efforts required, or where would you put it?
Did you want me to answer that one? Oh. Nice to see you, by the way. Look, that's a very difficult question to answer, and I mean, maybe touching a little bit on the earlier question. We had to Unloan's essentially an entire bank in retail lending within the Australian market. There's a huge amount of complexity. There's a huge amount of capability that needs to sit behind just the 10-minute home loan originations process that we built. So it's you almost need to assess all of those 20-odd capabilities that we've built on a case-by-case basis to determine a level of reuse. What we did is we really focused on those core capabilities, unlocking, a customer account and payments creation within the bank, and really using the bank's capabilities for those key pieces. And then, outside of that, it was around sort of how do we opportunistically work with partners inside and outside the bank to turn on all of those other bits and pieces that Unload would need to get to market. So, from a core capabilities perspective, it's absolutely designed to be reusable. From a partnership perspective, you need to look on a case-by-case basis, I'm afraid.
And maybe just to add one last thought to that from an X15 perspective. I think that there's this challenge that we always face between startup and corporate, where it's not so much that it's reusable. There's also a challenge around just a lack of clarity of what needs to happen, right? And so the typical kind of, well, who do I need to speak to within a corporate? There's 30,000 people and you get pinged along. And so one of the things that I think has been really valuable for us, answering your question around the next Unload or the next venture, is a better degree of clarity of where there are areas where we say, look, actually we think we're pretty comfortable. We've designed the processes that mean that you have the right level of agency and speed. But then there are areas, candidly, that maybe we haven't got that quite right, but we're working on it, and this is how we work on it. getting 2 years of use cases to have a more clear conversation up front and not waste anyone's time and be clear on what the trade-off is in and of itself really valuable.
One last question.
Yeah, last one. Thank you so much for the presentation. My main question is where to from here now that you've delivered the product? How do you expand inside of a CBA ecosystem? Obviously, they've got their innovation. You'll have your innovation. How does that work hand in hand together?
Dan?
For Dan, I think.
Where to for Unloan or where to for Commonwealth Bank? So for Unloan, number one is we're focused on radical simplicity. I think most startups will know this. You want to be super focused on who your customer is, and you want to be super focused on your product set. It's always tempting to try and serve more audiences or try and add feature upon feature upon feature. Our view is success equals refining what we already have and expanding our reach to more customers, but remaining really, really clear about what we do well and continuing to strive to be the best at that.
Yeah, and from a CBA perspective, we keep evolving this product or this service, these banking services that we've exposed for Unloan, and we have many other consumers inside the bank who want to use those capabilities as well. So continuing to drive quality, continuing to add features and build it out.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks, everyone, for listening.
Thank you.